The morning sun cast golden rays across the manicured lawns of Royal Ascot as thousands of elegantly dressed guests began to arrive for one of Britain's most prestigious racing events. Among the sea of top hats and flowing dresses, all eyes naturally turned toward the royal box, where the familiar figures of Prince William and Catherine, the Princess of Wales, made their entrance with the grace and poise that had become their trademark. Catherine stepped from the royal car wearing a stunning powder blue dress that complemented her radiant complexion perfectly. The midi-length creation featured delicate lace details that caught the light as she moved, while her signature brunette waves were styled in an elegant updo beneath a matching fascinator adorned with subtle pearls. William, looking dapper in his traditional morning suit complete with a grey top hat, offered his arm to his wife with the same tender gesture that had charmed the world since their university days at St. Andrews. The couple had been married for over a decade now, yet there was something distinctly different about their energy this particular morning. Perhaps it was the way Catherine's eyes sparkled with mischief as she whispered something in William's ear during their walk toward the royal enclosure, or how William's usually composed demeanor seemed to crack just slightly, revealing the playful man behind the royal title. The photographers stationed along the route noticed it immediately, their cameras clicking furiously to capture whatever magic was unfolding between the future king and queen. As they settled into the royal box, William leaned back in his chair with an unusually relaxed posture, his hand finding Catherine's with a natural ease that spoke of deep familiarity and comfort. The gesture wasn't lost on the crowd below, many of whom had followed their love story from its earliest days. There was something profoundly moving about witnessing genuine affection between two people who lived their lives under such intense scrutiny, and the assembled guests found themselves smiling along with the royal couple. The first race was about to begin, and the excitement in the air was palpable. Catherine pulled out a small pair of binoculars, but, instead of focusing them on the track, she playfully turned them toward William, studying his profile with exaggerated intensity. "What exactly are you looking for?" William asked with a grin, his voice carrying just loud enough for those nearby to catch the warmth in his tone. "Just making sure you're really my husband and not some imposter," Catherine replied with a laugh that was both musical and genuine. The real William would never sit this still for this long without fidgeting with his cufflinks. As if on cue, William glanced down at his wrists and realized he had indeed been unconsciously adjusting the silver links, a nervous habit Catherine had lovingly teased him about for years. The banter between them continued as the horses thundered down the track, but their attention seemed more focused on each other than on the race itself. William pointed out various guests in the crowd below, sharing amusing observations that made Catherine cover her mouth to stifle her laughter. It was clear that despite the formal setting and the watching eyes of hundreds of people, they were creating their own private bubble of intimacy and joy. When the first race concluded, the traditional cheers and applause erupted from the crowd, but William and Catherine's celebration was uniquely their own. Catherine had apparently placed a small private wager with her husband about which horse would win, and her victorious grin suggested she had chosen correctly. William good-naturedly reached into his jacket pocket and produced what appeared to be a small chocolate, which he presented to his wife with an elaborate bow that made her burst into delighted laughter. "Your winnings, my lady," he said with mock formality, though his eyes danced with genuine amusement. Catherine accepted the chocolate with equal ceremony, popping it into her mouth before leaning over to give William a quick kiss on the cheek. The gesture was spontaneous and natural, the kind of small intimacy that married couples share without thinking, but, in the context of their royal roles, it felt refreshingly human and real. The afternoon was young, but already the couple had created several moments that would be discussed and analyzed by royal watchers for days to come. There was something different about their dynamic today, a looseness and freedom that suggested they had made a conscious decision to simply enjoy themselves rather than worry about maintaining perfect royal composure every moment. As the crowd prepared for the second race, William excused himself briefly to speak with some racing officials, leaving Catherine alone in the royal box for a few minutes. Rather than maintaining the stoic pose often expected of royal family members, she used the opportunity to people-watch with obvious delight, waving enthusiastically at children in the crowd who had spotted her and occasionally covering her mouth to hide her amusement at the more elaborate hat creations on display below. When William returned, he carried 2 glasses of champagne and wore an expression that suggested he had something planned. "I thought we might toast to a perfect day," he said, offering Catherine one of the flutes. She accepted it with a questioning look, clearly sensing that her husband was up to something but not quite sure what. To perfect days, she agreed, raising her glass. But, instead of the brief, formal toast that might be expected, William clinked his glass against hers with perhaps a bit too much enthusiasm, causing a small splash of champagne to land on Catherine's dress. For a moment, time seemed to freeze as both realized what had happened, and, then, William's horrified expression dissolved into helpless laughter that was immediately echoed by his wife. "I am so sorry," he managed between chuckles, reaching for his pocket square to dab at the small stain. But Catherine waved him away, still laughing. "It's nothing that won't dry," she assured him. "Besides, now I have a story to tell our children about the day Daddy tried to recreate our wedding toasting disaster at Royal Ascot." The reference to their wedding brought warm smiles to both their faces, and, for a moment, they seemed lost in shared memories that only they could access. The crowd around them continued with their own conversations and preparations for the next race, but William and Catherine remained in their own world, fingers intertwined as they gazed out over the racing grounds that had suddenly become the backdrop for another chapter in their enduring love story. The afternoon stretched before them, full of possibility and promise, and if the first hour was any indication, Royal Ascot 2024 would be remembered not just for the winning horses, but for the genuine joy and connection displayed by Britain's future monarchs. In a world where royal duty often required sacrifice of personal desires, William and Catherine had somehow found a way to be both perfectly royal and perfectly themselves, creating a moment of authentic happiness that resonated far beyond the boundaries of the racing grounds. The second race brought an entirely different energy to Royal Ascot as the afternoon sun climbed higher, casting everything in warm, golden light that seemed to enhance the already magical atmosphere. Catherine had discreetly dabbed away the champagne spots from her dress, but the incident had only served to relax both her and William further, as if the small mishap had given them permission to be more spontaneous and natural. William had loosened his tie just slightly, a small rebellion that would have been unthinkable at a more formal state function, but somehow felt perfectly appropriate for the relaxed elegance of Ascot. Catherine noticed the change immediately and reached over to adjust the tie with the practiced ease of a wife who had been making similar small corrections for years. The gesture was so natural and intimate that several photographers managed to capture it, creating images that would later be described as showing the couple's genuine comfort with each other. As the horses began their parade to the starting line for the next race, Catherine pulled out her racing program and began studying it with intense concentration. William watched her for a moment, clearly amused by her sudden serious approach to horse racing. "Have you become a racing expert while I wasn't paying attention?" he asked, leaning closer to peer over her shoulder at the colorful pages filled with statistics and breeding information. "I'm trying to understand what makes a good racehorse," Catherine replied, her finger tracing down a column of numbers that clearly meant something to her, though William couldn't quite follow her logic. "George has been asking me questions about horses lately, and I realized I don't actually know much beyond the fact that they're fast and beautiful." The mention of their eldest son brought a soft smile to William's face. At 10 years old, Prince George had recently developed a fascination with all things equestrian, much to his parents' delight and occasional exasperation. "He asked me last week if we could get a racehorse," William shared, shaking his head at the memory. "I tried to explain that Buckingham Palace doesn't exactly have facilities for thoroughbred training." Catherine laughed at the image of their son trying to convince his parents to add a racing stable to their already complicated lives. "He also asked if he could ride in one of these races when he's older," she added. "I told him he'd need to start with lessons and work his way up, but you know how determined he can be when he sets his mind on something." The conversation about their children seemed to add an extra layer of warmth to their afternoon, reminding them of the life they had built together beyond their royal duties. William found himself studying Catherine's profile as she continued reading her program, marveling at how motherhood had added new depths to her beauty and character. She had always been lovely, but becoming a mother had given her a strength and confidence that made her even more radiant. The starting bell rang, and suddenly, the peaceful moment was shattered by the thunder of hooves and the roar of the crowd. But, instead of watching the race with the polite interest typically expected of royal guests, William and Catherine found themselves caught up in the genuine excitement of the competition. Catherine had apparently chosen a horse to support based on her research, and she was cheering with unrestrained enthusiasm as her selection took an early lead. "Come on, Thunder's Dream," she called out, rising slightly from her seat in her excitement. William watched in delighted amazement as his usually composed wife transformed into an enthusiastic racing fan, her careful royal bearing temporarily forgotten in favor of genuine emotion. When her chosen horse began to fall behind in the final stretch, Catherine's face fell with such obvious disappointment that William couldn't help but reach over and squeeze her hand in comfort. "There's always the next race," he assured her gently, though his eyes sparkled with amusement at her competitive spirit. Catherine turned to him with a rueful smile, clearly embarrassed by her display of enthusiasm but not quite able to regret it. "I may have gotten a bit carried away," she admitted. "But, did you see how beautifully that horse was running? Even losing, there was something magnificent about the effort." William nodded, but his attention was focused more on his wife's animated face than on any horse. There was something incredibly attractive about seeing Catherine so passionate and unguarded, and he found himself falling in love with her all over again in this moment of spontaneous emotion. "You know what I love about you," he said suddenly, his voice soft enough that only she could hear him over the continuing noise of the crowd. Catherine raised an eyebrow questioningly, clearly not expecting such a serious turn in their light-hearted afternoon. "What?" she asked, though there was something in William's expression that made her heart skip slightly, even after all these years of marriage. "You care about everything so deeply," William replied, his hand still holding hers. "Whether it's a state dinner or a horse race or helping George with his homework, you put your whole heart into it. It's one of the things that made me fall in love with you, and it's still one of the things I love most about watching you navigate the world." The unexpected declaration left Catherine momentarily speechless, her cheeks coloring slightly pink beneath her careful makeup. Around them, the crowd was beginning to settle as the winning horse was led into the winner's circle, but, in their small section of the royal box, time seemed suspended as the couple shared a moment of intimate connection that transcended their public roles. "William," Catherine began, her voice slightly breathless with surprise and pleasure at his unexpected romantic declaration. But, before she could continue, they were interrupted by the approach of several racing officials who needed to speak with the prince about the upcoming trophy presentation. The moment was broken, but the warm glow between them remained as William excused himself to handle his official duties. Left alone again, Catherine touched her cheek where she could still feel the warmth of her blush, amazed that her husband could still surprise her with such heartfelt spontaneity. Their marriage had weathered many storms and challenges, both public and private, but moments like these reminded her why they had chosen each other in the first place, and why their love had only grown stronger with time. When William returned a few minutes later, he was accompanied by a young girl of perhaps 8 years old, wearing a beautiful yellow dress and clutching a small bouquet of flowers. Catherine recognized her immediately as the daughter of one of the day's winning jockeys, brought to meet the royal couple as part of the traditional post-race ceremonies. But what happened next surprised everyone, including Catherine herself. Instead of the formal handshake and polite conversation that usually characterized such meetings, William knelt down to the little girl's eye level and began asking her about her father's horse, treating her with the same genuine interest he had shown his own children countless times. The gesture was so natural and kind that the little girl immediately relaxed, chattering enthusiastically about horses and racing while her parents watched with obvious pride and gratitude. Catherine found herself watching her husband with renewed admiration, seeing once again the qualities that had made her choose him not just as a romantic partner, but as the father of her children and her partner in the demanding life of royal service. William's natural warmth and genuine interest in people, regardless of their age or status, was one of his most endearing qualities, and seeing it on display always made her heart swell with love and pride. The afternoon was developing into something truly special, not because of any grand gestures or dramatic events, but because of these small, authentic moments that revealed the depth of character and love that William and Catherine brought to both their marriage and their public roles. As the little girl skipped back to her parents, clutching a small pin that William had given her from his jacket, Catherine realized that this day at Royal Ascot was becoming a perfect example of how their love had matured and deepened over the years, creating a foundation strong enough to support both their personal happiness and their public service. The third race of the afternoon brought an unexpected change in weather as soft clouds began to gather overhead, threatening the perfect sunshine that had blessed the early part of the day. Catherine glanced up at the sky with concern, not for herself but for the thousands of guests who had dressed so carefully for the occasion. William followed her gaze and then looked back at his wife with a knowing smile, recognizing the thoughtful expression she wore whenever she was thinking about others' comfort and happiness. "You're worried about everyone getting rained on, aren't you?" he asked gently, though he already knew the answer. It was so typical of Catherine to think first of others, even during what was meant to be a relaxing day for themselves. This quality of selfless consideration had drawn him to her from their earliest days together, and it continued to amaze him how naturally she extended compassion to everyone around her. Catherine nodded, absently reaching up to touch her fascinator as if checking that it was secure against any potential wind. "Look at all the beautiful outfits," she said, gesturing toward the crowd below where ladies in elaborate hats and flowing dresses had gathered in colorful clusters. "It would be such a shame if the weather spoiled everyone's day." Before William could respond, the first few drops of rain began to fall, causing a ripple of movement through the crowd as people began to prepare for the possibility of a shower. But, rather than head for cover immediately, Catherine stood up and moved to the edge of the royal box, looking out over the assembly with genuine concern for the guests below. What happened next would later be described by witnesses as one of the most touching displays of royal consideration they had ever witnessed. Instead of retreating to the covered area of the box, Catherine began waving to the crowd below, her gesture clearly meant to reassure and encourage them to enjoy themselves despite the changing weather. Her message seemed to be that if the rain didn't bother her, it shouldn't bother them either. William watched his wife with growing admiration as she continued her silent communication with the crowd, her warm smile and encouraging waves helping to maintain the festive atmosphere even as the raindrops began to increase. But what touched him most deeply was when Catherine removed her own fascinator and set it aside, clearly signaling that she wasn't going to let a little rain affect her enjoyment of the day. "Catherine, you don't need to do that," William said softly, moving to stand beside her. But she shook her head with a smile that was both determined and joyful. "If I can handle 3 children under the age of 10 during a thunderstorm, I think I can manage a little Royal Ascot drizzle," she replied with a laugh that made William's heart skip. The rain began in earnest now, but instead of causing the expected exodus to covered areas, something magical happened. The crowd below seemed to take their cue from Catherine's relaxed attitude, and, rather than running for shelter, many guests began to embrace the unexpected shower as part of the day's adventure. Laughter could be heard rising from various sections of the grounds as people helped each other protect elaborate hats and shared umbrellas with strangers. William found himself getting caught up in the moment, his usual concern for protocol temporarily forgotten in favor of enjoying this spontaneous turn of events with his wife. When Catherine laughed as a particularly large raindrop landed on her nose, William couldn't resist reaching over to gently wipe it away with his thumb, a gesture so tender and natural that several photographers managed to capture it despite the challenging conditions. The intimate moment stretched between them as they stood together in the soft rain, their formal attire beginning to show signs of the weather but neither seeming to care. There was something liberating about abandoning their usual careful attention to appearance and simply enjoying each other's company in the moment. Catherine's hair was beginning to escape its careful styling, creating soft tendrils that framed her face in a way that William found utterly enchanting. "You know," William said, his voice pitched low so only Catherine could hear him over the gentle pattering of rain, "this reminds me of that afternoon at St. Andrew's when we got caught in that downpour walking back from the library." Catherine's eyes lit up with recognition and warmth at the memory. It had been early in their relationship, and they had ended up taking shelter in a small coffee shop, spending hours talking and laughing while their clothes dried. "You bought me that terrible instant hot chocolate," Catherine remembered with a grin. "It was absolutely awful, but I didn't want to hurt your feelings by saying so." William laughed at the confession, shaking his head in mock dismay. "And here I thought I was being romantic," he replied. "I should have known you were just being polite." The shared memory seemed to add an extra layer of intimacy to their rain-soaked moment at Royal Ascot, connecting their present happiness to the foundation of their relationship built during those carefree university days. Despite all the changes and responsibilities that had come with their royal roles, at their core they were still the same two people who had fallen in love while walking through Scottish rain. As if responding to their reminiscent mood, the rain began to ease slightly, creating a soft mist that gave the entire racecourse an almost dreamlike quality. The crowd below had adapted beautifully to the weather change, with many guests now using the break in the racing schedule to socialize and enjoy the unexpected adventure together. The sound of laughter and conversation created a warm backdrop to William and Catherine's continued private conversation. "I love that we can still surprise each other," Catherine said softly, reaching for William's hand as they watched the scene below. Even after all these years and everything we've been through, you can still make me feel like that university student who never knew what wonderful thing might happen next." William squeezed her hand gently, moved by her words and the sincerity in her voice. "That's because with you, wonderful things are always happening," he replied. "Sometimes they're big, public things that the whole world sees, and sometimes they're small, private moments like this one. But they're always wonderful because I get to share them with you." The rain had created an unexpected pause in the formal racing schedule, but it had also created something precious and unrehearsed between William and Catherine. As they stood together in the soft mist, hands clasped and hearts full, they were creating another memory that would join the collection of special moments that had defined their relationship over the years. When the racing officials approached to discuss the possibility of a brief delay in the next race, William and Catherine exchanged a look that was full of shared understanding and quiet happiness. They had come to Royal Ascot expecting an enjoyable day of racing and royal duty, but the rain had given them something even better, a reminder of the spontaneous joy and deep connection that had brought them together in the first place and continued to sustain their love through every season of their extraordinary life together. The afternoon was far from over, and the best moments were still to come, but already this day was taking its place among their most treasured shared experiences. As the mist continued to swirl around them and the crowd below maintained its cheerful determination to enjoy the day regardless of weather, William and Catherine prepared to face whatever came next with the same spirit of adventure and mutual support that had carried them through over a decade of marriage and countless challenges and triumphs together. The rain had passed as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind a freshened atmosphere and the sweet scent of wet grass that seemed to invigorate everyone at Royal Ascot. The brief shower had actually enhanced rather than dampened the spirits of the crowd, and there was a sense of shared adventure and camaraderie among the guests that hadn't been present earlier in the day. Catherine had managed to repair most of her hair's careful styling, though a few rebellious strands continued to escape, giving her a more relaxed and approachable appearance that William found absolutely captivating. As the horses began to prepare for the fourth race of the day, William noticed that Catherine had become unusually quiet, standing at the edge of the royal box with a thoughtful expression as she watched the activity below. He moved to stand beside her, concerned that something might be troubling her, but when he followed her gaze, he realized she wasn't watching the racing preparations at all. Instead, her attention was focused on a young couple in the crowd below who were clearly attending their first Royal Ascot together. The pair couldn't have been much older than William and Catherine had been during their university days, and their excitement and nervousness were visible even from a distance. The young woman kept adjusting her hat and smoothing her dress, while her companion frequently checked his tie and glanced around as if he couldn't quite believe he was really there. Their joy in sharing this special experience together was so obvious and infectious that Catherine found herself smiling just watching them. "They remind me of us," William said softly, having followed Catherine's gaze and immediately understanding what had captured her attention. The young couple was indeed holding hands with the same tentative but determined affection that he remembered from his own early days of navigating public events with Catherine by his side. "Do you remember how terrified you were at your first really formal royal event?" Catherine laughed softly at the memory, though her eyes remained warm with emotion. "Terrified doesn't even begin to cover it," she admitted. "I was convinced I would trip, or say the wrong thing, or commit some horrible breach of protocol that would be front-page news the next day. But you kept whispering silly jokes to me to help me relax, and somehow we made it through." The memory brought back a flood of images from their early years together, when their relationship was still new and fragile, and every public appearance felt like a test they might fail. William remembered how Catherine's nervousness had actually made him more confident, because he had been so focused on helping her feel comfortable that he had forgotten his own anxieties. Taking care of her had become second nature, just as her presence had become his anchor in the sometimes overwhelming world of royal duty. "I think that's when I really knew," William said suddenly, his voice thoughtful as he continued to watch the young couple below. Catherine turned to look at him, curiosity evident in her expression. "Knew what?" she asked gently. "That I wanted to spend my life helping you feel safe and happy," William replied, his honesty as surprising to himself as it was to Catherine. "Watching you navigate all the challenges of this life with such grace and courage, but also knowing that I could be the person who made it a little easier for you. That felt like the most important job I could ever have." The unexpected declaration left Catherine momentarily speechless, her heart swelling with love and gratitude for the man she had married. After all these years, William could still surprise her with the depth of his feelings and his ability to articulate what their relationship meant to him. "You have made it easier," she said finally, her voice slightly husky with emotion. "Every single day, you've made it easier and better and more wonderful than I ever imagined it could be." Their moment of intimate conversation was gently interrupted by the approach of one of the racing stewards, who needed to speak with William about the upcoming trophy presentation for the fourth race. But, instead of stepping away immediately, William hesitated, clearly reluctant to break the spell of their shared reflection. Catherine noticed his hesitation and smiled, giving him a small nudge toward the waiting official. "Go," she said softly. "I'll be right here when you get back." As William walked away to handle his duties, Catherine remained at the edge of the royal box, her attention returning to the young couple below. But now she was seeing them through the lens of her conversation with William, recognizing in their nervous excitement the same hope and determination that had carried her and William through their own early challenges. It occurred to her that she and William had become the example now, the established couple that younger pairs looked to for inspiration and guidance. The thought was both humbling and empowering, reminding Catherine of the responsibility they carried not just as future monarchs, but as a visible example of how love could thrive even under the most challenging circumstances. Their marriage had weathered public scrutiny, personal losses, family difficulties, and the constant pressure of royal duty, but it had emerged stronger and more authentic with each passing year. When the fourth race began, Catherine found herself cheering with renewed enthusiasm, not so much for any particular horse but for the sheer joy of being alive and in love on such a beautiful day. The earlier rain had left everything looking refreshed and vibrant, and the energy of the crowd seemed to match her own elevated mood. She waved enthusiastically at the young couple she had been watching, delighted when they spotted her attention and waved back with obvious excitement and gratitude. William returned just as the race was reaching its climax, slipping easily back to Catherine's side as if he had never been away. "Did I miss anything important?" he asked, though his attention was clearly more focused on his wife's radiant expression than on the horses crossing the finish line below. "Just me having an absolutely perfect day with the man I love," Catherine replied, her honesty matching the openness he had shown earlier. William felt his heart skip at her words, amazed that after all their years together, Catherine could still make him feel like the luckiest man in the world with just a simple declaration of her feelings. The winning horse was led into the winner's circle amid cheers and applause, but William and Catherine barely noticed the official ceremonies happening around them. They were too caught up in their own private celebration of everything they had built together and everything they still had to look forward to. The afternoon was drawing toward its close, but the memories they were creating would last much longer than any single day at the races. As the crowd began to shift and move in preparation for the final race of the day, William and Catherine remained in their own bubble of contentment and connection. They had come to Royal Ascot as the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, but somewhere during the course of the afternoon, they had simply become William and Catherine again, a couple deeply in love and grateful for every moment they got to spend together. The young couple they had been watching earlier passed by below their box, and the woman looked up with such obvious admiration and hope that Catherine felt compelled to blow her a small kiss. The gesture was spontaneous and heartfelt, a blessing passed from one generation of love to the next, and the young woman's face lit up with joy at the unexpected acknowledgement. It was exactly the kind of moment that made Catherine grateful for the platform her position gave her to spread happiness and encouragement to others. The final race of the day approached with a golden sunset beginning to paint the sky in magnificent shades of pink and orange, creating a perfect backdrop for the conclusion of what had already become an unforgettable day at Royal Ascot. The earlier rain had left the air crisp and clean, and there was a sense of magic in the atmosphere that seemed to affect everyone present. Catherine had long since given up trying to maintain her morning's perfect appearance, and her slightly windswept hair and natural makeup gave her a radiant, approachable beauty that was even more striking than her carefully crafted royal polish. William had noticed the change in his wife throughout the day, watching as she gradually relaxed from her morning formality into something more spontaneous and joyful. It reminded him of the woman he had fallen in love with at university, before the weight of royal expectations had taught them both to be more careful and controlled in their public expressions. Seeing Catherine laugh freely and respond with genuine emotion to the day's events had awakened something in him that he hadn't realized he had been missing. As the horses lined up for the final race, Catherine surprised William by reaching into her small handbag and producing a folded piece of paper. "I have a confession to make," she said with a mischievous smile that immediately captured his full attention. "I may have done a little research on today's races before we came." She unfolded the paper to reveal detailed notes about several of the horses, including breeding information, recent performance records, and even some observations about their training routines. William stared at the carefully prepared notes with amazement and growing amusement. "Catherine Wales, are you telling me you've been secretly studying horse racing?" he asked, though his tone was more admiring than accusatory. The idea that his wife had taken the time to research their day's entertainment so thoroughly was both surprising and deeply touching, showing once again her commitment to fully engaging with whatever life brought their way. "I wanted to be able to have real conversations about the races instead of just making polite noises," Catherine admitted, though her cheeks colored slightly pink at the confession. "And I thought it might be fun to see if I could pick a winner based on actual knowledge rather than just choosing names I liked." She paused, then added with a grin, "Plus, I may have wanted to impress you with my newfound expertise." The admission that Catherine had gone to such lengths partly to impress him after all their years together touched William deeply. It spoke to her continued investment in their relationship and her desire to share in his interests, even when those interests were as far from her usual concerns as thoroughbred racing statistics. "You never stop amazing me," he said softly, meaning every word. Catherine consulted her notes one final time before pointing to a horse in the lineup below. "Number 7, Royal Thunder," she announced with confidence. "Excellent bloodlines, recent improvements in training times, and the jockey has a strong record on this type of track." William followed her gaze to the magnificent bay horse she had selected, then looked back at his wife with newfound respect for her analytical approach to the sport. "Royal Thunder it is then," he agreed, though privately he was more interested in watching Catherine's face than in any horse race. There was something incredibly attractive about seeing her so passionate and knowledgeable about something new, and he found himself falling in love with this expert version of his wife just as completely as he had with all her other incarnations over the years. The starting bell rang, and the final race of the day began with all the drama and excitement that had characterized the afternoon. But, this time, William and Catherine were watching with more than casual interest, both focused intently on Royal Thunder as the horse settled into position among the pack. Catherine's research had clearly been thorough, because the horse ran exactly as she had predicted, staying steady in the middle of the pack during the early stages while saving energy for a final sprint. As the horses rounded the final turn, Royal Thunder began to make his move, and Catherine's excitement became increasingly difficult to contain. "Come on," she whispered, her hands clenched in unconscious tension as she watched her carefully chosen horse begin to challenge for the lead. William found himself caught up in her enthusiasm, cheering for Royal Thunder as much because of Catherine's investment in the outcome as because of any interest in the race itself. The final stretch was thrilling, with 3 horses running nearly neck and neck as they approached the finish line. Catherine was on her feet now, all pretense of royal composure forgotten as she urged her horse forward with obvious passion. "He's going to do it," she breathed, and then, as Royal Thunder pulled ahead in the final moments, he did it. "William, he won." The victory celebration that followed was unlike anything typically seen in the royal box at Ascot. Catherine threw her arms around William's neck in spontaneous joy, and he lifted her slightly off her feet as they both laughed with delight at her successful prediction. The moment was captured by dozens of cameras, but neither of them cared about anything beyond sharing this perfect triumph together. "I can't believe I actually picked the winner," Catherine said, still slightly breathless from excitement as William set her back down. "All that research actually pie."